All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So, I want to start by introducing our speaker for tonight, Nick Espinosa. He is an expert in cybersecurity and network infrastructure. Nick Espinosa has consulted with clients ranging from small businesses up to the Fortune 100 level for decades. Nick founded Windy City Networks Incorporated in 1998 at age 19 and was acquired in 2013. In 2015, Security Fanatics, a cyber warfare outfit dedicated to designing custom cyber defense strategies for medium to enterprise corporations, was launched. Nick is an internationally recognized speaker, member of the Forbes Technology Council, and TEDx speaker. He is also a strategic advisor to Human ID, regular columnist for Forbes, award-winning co-author of a best-selling book, Easy Prey, and a host of the Deep Dive nationally syndicated radio show. Nick serves on the board of advisors for Roosevelt University's College of Arts and Sciences, as well as their Center for Cyber and Information Security, and is the official spokesperson for the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition. Nick is known as an industry thought leader and sought after for his advice on the future of technology and how it will impact everyday businesses and consumers. So we are excited to have you here with us, Nick, tonight, and we can't wait to hear what you have to offer us in your talk. So I will stop my share now and feel free to go ahead and jump in.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I guess I don't need to use my introduction slide now. I think you did a great job. So thank you for that. And I appreciate it. And thank you overall for NOVA for having me here. I'm very excited. I always love talking to students and essentially just giving you the lay of the land from a no nonsense kind of perspective. You should be able to see my screen by now. My cover slide. And okay, great. All right. So with that, I want to talk about competing in the cybersecurity market. And this is a presentation that I love to give to students, just basically as a primer, as an understanding of what we here in the cybersecurity community tend to be looking for, in our competitive landscape. And quite frankly, we have basically a massive hiring spree going on right now. So now is a good time to get into cybersecurity. We need all the qualified help, quite frankly, that we can get. And so with that, let's get going here. As was already mentioned, this is my bio. I'm not going to go through that anymore. And so with that, let's start with understanding essentially the need for cybersecurity personnel. And we have a huge deficit right now, and I will talk about that in a little bit. But if we are looking overall at the overall landscape that we have right now, especially here in the United States, the US government roughly spent, and these are like the last official numbers, and it's continuing to increase, $40 billion in 2018 in cybersecurity alone. And the reason why I'm using 2018 numbers is because that is essentially at the dawn of ransomware in its current state being used as a service that we started to see an explosion. And obviously we saw it beforehand, but it really started to become prevalent through 2019. And then in 2020, essentially COVID just basically blew the doors off of that. And we all saw essentially every indicator of compromise pointing from every gang towards using COVID-19 and coronavirus as a lure, whether it was phishing websites that said, hey, here's where you buy toilet paper in the pandemic, or your stimulus check didn't get it, or here's where you buy PPE. It was all coronavirus related. And so I use the 2018 stat because I think it's essentially a very important one, because we have seen this massive explosion. And now that we have bigger issues with the federal government, such as the SolarWinds data breach, that we've seen critical infrastructure hit like Kaseya and Colonial Pipeline more specifically, we basically have a need for cybersecurity personnel, and that spending at the federal level continues to increase, let alone the cyber defense strategies worldwide. And by the end of 2021, the entire world will have spent $1 trillion defending ourselves since 2017. So in 4 or 5 years, collectively, that is NOVA as a college, that is the federal government, that is the smallest government on the planet, that is the mom and pop coffee shop in Mumbai, India. Collectively, we will have spent $1 trillion in cyber defense by the end of this year. And by the end of this year, the hackers, the criminals, will have extracted over 6 trillion from us. It is the single largest wealth transfer in history. It is going on right now, and it is thanks very much to the internet and explosion in cryptocurrency. This is why we need good cybersecurity personnel. Everybody's hacking everybody, and it's a huge problem. Now, by virtue of that, stolen personal information buying and selling continues to absolutely explode in the dark web. I do live demonstrations on how easy it is for me to find usernames and passwords and personally identifiable information in the dark web just by looking up sites and where I can get this information for free. It's absolutely crazy. Not to mention counterfeit currencies and passports and all those kinds of things are a huge, huge problem in the dark web. In fact, I basically have fake passports that we used for research that we were able to purchase, and they, quite frankly, are very similar to passports from around the world. We are also continuing to see an explosion of basically trafficking, weapons, narcotics, all these kinds of things in the dark web, and also sometimes on the surface web, leveraging things like Facebook groups. If you didn't know, there have been actual war crimes committed in Facebook groups because Facebook, one, their artificial intelligence and human moderators can't keep up with the content, but also they don't have enough foreign language speakers. They're primarily obviously in English, being based here in the United States, but they can't keep up. And so we've seen a lot of different things trafficked across Facebook, from humans to art stolen during war and everything else, which is actually a war crime. So that's a huge, huge problem. We have seen a ton of cryptocurrency theft, both also hard currency as well, not to mention counterfeit currency, as I mentioned, is a huge, huge problem. But basically, we have a huge problem with stolen crypto wallets, stolen Bitcoin, stolen Ethereum, take your cryptocurrency pick, not to mention a whole bunch of different schemes because it's unregulated, such as pump and dump schemes, which are illegal to do in standard stock trading, like on Wall Street. So that's a huge problem. And we need people to basically combat this, to research this, to defend against this, to continue to harden these things. A lot of people think that the blockchain technology is perfect, but I'm telling you right now, it's not. The Cloud Security Alliance themselves put out a report of over 200 different ways that they can successfully attack a blockchain. And so we need good cybersecurity personnel for this as well. On top of that, on average, we've got 200,000 new malware variants being created daily. And that is a huge, huge number. If you think about it, we are talking about millions of variants daily on ransomware to create these zero-day infections that are bypassing more traditional threat detection systems like standard antivirus and infecting basically computer networks, as well as ransoming and extorting these companies. And we are seeing a rise essentially in this. I mean, basically, we have a huge, huge problem because studies have shown that 75% of these victims essentially have no preventative measures in place. Now, that could be like grandma in Idaho, or that could be small to mid-sized business that really hasn't taken this seriously. And a lot of organizations don't understand the balance between their technology debt, meaning the technology that they're running right now that has been aging over years, and they're spending more each year to maintain an inadequate and insecure system, versus spending money to maintain current what they have and therefore harden it for cybersecurity. And quite frankly, we don't have enough personnel to really go around to the 75% of the victims and say, hey, here's how you do it. We need help. We seriously need help. And as I was saying before, we have a massive deficit. We have 5 million open positions worldwide, 500,000 of which roughly are in the United States. And so this is a huge, huge deal. You are basically going to get a job if you're going into cybersecurity, even if you stink at it, because right now we are looking at building these pipelines through colleges to start funneling new cybersecurity professionals, newly minted cybersecurity professionals, into our organizations so we can start training them above and beyond the certifications and the classes on essentially the methodologies that we all use. And so that is a problem, and that is the world we live in and why we need good cybersecurity help. Now, that said, overall, holistically, we have a serious problem on our hands. And this is just, I think, underscores the need for good cybersecurity personnel, because the general population, a good healthy percentage of them, are ignorant of how safe the infrastructure around them can be. My first TED Talk, I've done 4, was actually called Trust Sucks. And I talk about exactly this, but this information, these percentages are coming from Pew Research, no slouch in the research game. But almost a third of us don't understand that public wireless can be unsafe, meaning you're going into that favorite coffee shop and you've got essentially this trust built up there. You know the barista, you walk in, everybody knows you, you've used the wireless 99 times, so on time 100, your logic and your emotions basically say it's a safe place. Logically, it's good. I can use this again. And you don't know. You are exposing that device into an infrastructure that other devices potentially malicious can see. A third of us have no idea about that. Almost a third of us. Over half of us don't understand what ransomware does. They just don't. We simply don't understand what it does and how that's a serious problem. Almost 2/3, 61%, don't understand that private browsing, when you open it on your phone or your computer, doesn't actually shield you from being tracked by your internet service provider or the websites you're going to or anywhere else. It's just simply not leaving its footprints in your history of your browser, whatever browser you're using. So we have this really weird perception that if we go into private browsing mode, suddenly nobody can track us and it's anything but. Your ISP knows everywhere you go, unless you're using a VPN. But unfortunately, VPNs or virtual private networks, 86% don't know that a VPN actually helps minimize risks of an insecure connection. It also shields you from your internet service provider. So if you're in that coffee shop and you've got a VPN running, as you move data off of your phone out to wherever you're moving it to, it has a layer of encryption that is hard to attack. But VPNs are also not firewalls. You're still exposing that device to a network. And so when you hear commercials that basically say, well, I can work from the coffee shop because I have a VPN, no, it's part of this miseducation that we have here. And when we are looking at almost 9 out of 10 people not being able to understand simply what a VPN does and how it improves their security, that's a huge problem on our hands. And almost 9 out of 10 literally can't identify, when given a panel of 4 different pictures, what multi-factor authentication is. This is one of those table stakes default things that you should have on everything from Facebook to your bank and everything in between in your entire digital life. And almost 90% of the population is clueless about this, which means those stolen usernames and passwords get them into trouble. This also relates to businesses and organizations as well. Colonial Pipeline, stolen username and password, no multi-factor authentication, got right into the billing system, hit it for ransom. Colonial Pipeline didn't know how to bill their suppliers, and so they shut down the pipeline. The pipeline was never hit. It wasn't. It was a billing system. Pipeline wasn't touched, but instead of figuring out the billing later with their insurance company, and they were insured, they decided to choose the national panic option and just shut it down. These are the kinds of things that we are talking about here that are going on, which is why we need good cybersecurity personnel everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And if you think about it, and as we are looking forward, the future needs cybersecurity. Now think about this. Soon we'll have 5G everywhere. If you're in a major metropolitan area, I'm sitting here in Chicago, we've got 5G. As soon as I move out of the Chicagoland area, it drops to 4G or worse, and now 6G is actually being tested and demoed, although it's probably about a decade out. But by virtue of that, I wrote an article for Forbes called Why 5G Will Get Us All Hacked. Now we are offering more bandwidth. Now we are offering more availability, more speed, more performance. We are changing the understanding of how we build a network for an organization. When new buildings are being built, when they're saying, why run wiring when Verizon or AT&T or whoever can give us almost the same speed, and now they're expecting the internet service providers to be that perimeter. These are things that we are now adjusting for, that we have to redesign networks and topologies for as the larger corporations are starting to adopt basically these technologies and essentially partnering with the Verizons of the world to get that done. IoT continues to explode in popularity. The Internet of Things is absolutely just going bonkers. We literally were doing a network assessment on an organization that had a wireless toaster, and so they could basically send pictures to the toaster and print it on bread. I kid you not, We broke into it in about 5 minutes. It was very, very cheaply developed Linux that they put on there, and we were able to weaponize their toaster against their network. That was a very interesting report I delivered to their CEO. But as we have this continual explosion of billions and billions of devices, we are looking at any given time, per industry statistics, 10% of all IoT weaponized for whatever reason. For example, Mirai a few years ago weaponized for bandwidth attacks. There have been Mirai variants basically being created by foreign governments that are still out there. And so again, IoT and IoT development is a huge, huge thing. I'm actually one of the founding people in terms of early adopter. I did not found it, for the record, of the IoT Security Institute out of Australia. I think it was like number 9 to actually get their certification, which is a very rare certification to get. So it's something that we have to continuously be looking forward to as we are developing and maturing our careers as well. Now, also, the internet in 10 years is going to be a much different place globally. I actually wrote an article on Forbes for this one as well back in 2018. By 2028, we are actually looking, thanks to China's Belt and Road Initiative, of a bifurcation of the internet, having essentially free and open internet, in Western countries, United States, Europe, Australia, et cetera. But thanks to China's Belt and Road Initiative, they've been bringing mass surveillance, heavy lockdowns to internet and internet service providers to their member countries. And by virtue of that, they are giving this infrastructure to these other countries and teaching these authoritarian regimes how to actually monitor, lock down, and censor their internet in the same way that China does. And so we are starting to see this competing infrastructure emerge. And there are large companies like Google that are trying to play both sides of the fence. If you're interested in this, go Google Project Dragonfly, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about and what they were working on until we essentially found out. Also, the question now that we've got right now is, are we seeing the fall of Facebook and potentially the rise of something else? Facebook being the behemoth with over 3 billion users on the planet, we are starting to see competing smaller social medias that become more niche or more focused on one group or another, whatever that is, whether it's politics or any other category. But Facebook is having some serious problems right now. They've had a whistleblower come out recently, to say basically just things that we've known for quite some time. They're now in the process, if you didn't hear about this, possibly changing their name next week or creating something like Google did with Alphabet to be a parent company so they can spin things off. We're going to see where this goes, but we have also seen studies that the younger generations, meaning, let's say from 13 to about 30, are not adopting Facebook at the rate that Facebook wants. It's Instagram, it's unfortunately TikTok, which I'm not a fan of for privacy and security reasons, and other apps that people are essentially adopting, the younger generations. And Facebook is banking on, okay, you don't want to be on mom and dad's social media, but when you get through high school and you get through college and you have a job and you're settled in and all of that, you'll come right back to Facebook because you're essentially establishing that relationship again. But as we are looking at this, I'm one of those people that's constantly deriding Facebook for their privacy and security concerns, and we need more voices in this industry, especially in the future as this grows. Also, according to the United Nations, all countries are aware of cyber threats, but only 50% of countries, actual countries that govern people, have a plan. That is a United Nations study from a couple of years ago, and I'm actually been working with the United Nations ITU. The project's on hold, but we're in the process of getting the investors for it to develop cyber defense strategies for developing nations. This is why we need cybersecurity personnel worldwide. We are not confined to these borders. I might be here in the United States, but my job takes me globally. And that's something that I think is a really cool perk of it, because I get to fly everywhere on other people's dimes. So that's always nice. And I get to help people as well. So it's a great field to be in. Also, the United States' cybersecurity is a hot mess. You can look at the election system, and I'm not adjudicating the 2020 election or the 2016 election or anything along those lines. We know that voting machines have vulnerabilities. And as I said, in my writing, a vulnerability does not actually equate an intrusion. But what that does is erode confidence, it erodes trust. And when we have this massive misinformation and disinformation problem here in the United States, it becomes much harder to actually educate people on vulnerability versus intrusion and vulnerability management. Not to mention the fact that there was a recent survey done essentially by the inspectors generals of all of the major branches of the federal government, and we have found some startling and just amazingly bad results in a lot of these departments. Some don't know where 60% of their assets are. So how do you know if they've been hijacked, stolen, lost? What data is on them? Technology debt. Some organizations, some major federal agencies are using databases that are 20 plus years old and just spend taxpayer money to essentially maintain a system that costs them more and more over time, as opposed to migrating and modernizing and therefore hardening. These are problems that we have, which is why we need cybersecurity personnel. And this 500,000 body deficit is a huge, huge problem. Also, as I mentioned, we are in hiring mode. All of cybersecurity is in hiring mode. My company's hiring. All of my friendly competitors, all of my non-friendly competitors are hiring. Everybody is hiring right now for cybersecurity because we are so behind. And so by virtue of that, I want to dive in and I want to essentially talk about cybersecurity careers and various roles and all of that. And I want to start with this, and I love starting with this because everybody, when I talk in cybersecurity, or I should say almost everybody says, yeah, I just want to hack into things. I want to break into things and I don't want to get arrested doing it. And that's well and good. But the problem is we can only hire so much of the red team. If you're looking at this holistically essentially lays out the approach that we have to the team system as we are essentially looking for the vulnerabilities and developing good defenses against them. So you can see essentially the red team breaks in, the blue team defends, but the other teams are there to start getting the results of how the red team and blue team did and start to look at how we can enhance security, how we can defend, how we can build better architecture, how we can automate things like threat detection using machine or deep learning artificial intelligence, how this essentially applies to our logistical supply chain as we are moving products or data, how this informs our compliance in whatever compliance standards we have to meet the cybersecurity controls that the federal government or a governing body puts out for us. This is essentially a huge, huge thing. And the number one problem that we have typically in cybersecurity is a lack of education. And so the orange team becomes beyond critical, but you never hear about them. And so understand that while everybody wants to be, a pen tester or a hacker if they're going into cybersecurity, we have a multifaceted system, which is why I always use this image as well. And if you were to approach me on LinkedIn saying, hey, Nick, I'm a student in year 1 through 4, and I'm interested in cybersecurity, I will always send you this picture because this, I think, lays it out incredibly well. If you're going into cybersecurity, you're going to get, I think, overall basic understanding of cybersecurity, approaches, topologies, all those kinds of things. But the specializations are there. Whether you're going into the education side of it, whether you're going into risk side or framework or governance, there's so many different things that you can be. And most large companies have armies of people that specialize in all of these things. You'll even note that physical security is part of this, because as we approach cybersecurity holistically, we're not just looking at the technical safeguards or controls, we're looking at the physical safeguards and controls, as well as the administrative, meaning the maintenance, the policy side of things as well. To be holistic in cybersecurity requires a lot of different disciplines, and you're not expected to know all of these things. But I always tell students, take this as a primer, learn about things that might interest you here and see where you fit in. See what you think you're going to be passionate about. And I guarantee you there's a job out there that is going to use that specialty right now. It is a huge, huge market that we have. And like I said, we have a huge, huge deficit. So find something that you're passionate on and move that way. And with that, this basically is one of the typical career paths that we see overall for cybersecurity. And it can take years depending on your strength, your talent, your capabilities, and all of that. But it also depends on the organization. Most organizations, and I'm talking about larger organizations, usually have either a 10 to 20 step path to go from basic to the top. And it takes time and it takes energy and patience and all those kinds of things. But all of this is needed. And to get basically to the chief information security officer level, usually we're looking for a minimum of 10 plus years experience, understanding deep infrastructure, understanding topology, understanding risk and security frameworks and all those things. And I will talk about what we look for as an employer in cybersecurity at a very high-end level. But this is essentially where you are going to be moving up the chain as you are graduating college, with your certifications and your degrees and all those kinds of things, going up essentially the food chain. And on top of that, understand that if you, on top of understanding and learning and being certified and graduating into cybersecurity, are also not taking management training, that can also stunt your growth at the top level as well. And so good chief information security officers are also those that have training. On top of the multiple certifications that I have and the years of experience I have extensively been through different training and management studies so that as an advisor to corporations, to CISOs, to CEOs, can basically speak about the growth strategy for the organization. And when you think about it this way. The CEO of the organization is going to have a vision for what the company is going to do in the next 3 to 5 years. The CFO is going to fund it. The CIO, the Chief Information Officer, is going to build and maintain the engine for that business's economy, the technology that drives and streamlines essentially their processes and people. The CISO, the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, and the cybersecurity personnel are what defend that engine. And if you are not marrying technology to cybersecurity, it's just a matter of when you get hit. It's not if. And that is a huge, huge thing. And I cannot pound that into you enough. Make sure, as you are training on cybersecurity, you are approaching business as business as well, especially if you want to raise through the ranks. So important for businesses small and huge. It really is. And so with that, let's talk about what cybersecurity employers are essentially looking for. And honestly, it really depends on the position, but we honestly need everyone. And so we will look at people that have cybersecurity training from very basic to years of experience in various veins of that huge branched out document that I showed you, because oftentimes cross-training can happen or the experience can fit an entire domain as opposed to the specialization over time. And so understanding that it really depends on the position, but some of the basic attributes that we look for overall for security professionals is a deep understanding of infrastructure setup and design. In other words, you have to understand network topology at a very deep level. Most organizations that you walk into as a cybersecurity professional are using a perimeter-based defensive strategy. And we have been moving past that since 2011 when Forrester came out with the zero trust infrastructure model or zero trust architecture. And that is a huge, huge thing. Also, I highly recommend understanding protocol theory, meaning, do you understand how TCP and IP work? Do you understand the protocols that run on them, DNS, SMTP, RDP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Because if you can really understand how packets move from A to B, then you can properly understand how to capture it, how to break it, how to alter it, and how to defend it as well. This becomes a very critical thing when we are designing complex infrastructures, marrying different technologies, different systems, different protocols together to make solutions work. So I think that's really important. Also, degrees and certifications or experience. And obviously, as you're sitting here in college going through this, obviously degrees and certifications are where you're going to start that are going to get you through that door. Experience at the entry level is much less needed, especially in cybersecurity. And some of the most brilliant people I've known have just naturally, gone into cybersecurity because they have deep backgrounds of infrastructure, technology, and routing. And this was a natural progression, and they're very easy to train. But as you are going through college, getting those degrees and certifications is a good way to get your foot in the door, not to mention internships and all those kinds of things as well that show that you really are focused on this, not to mention hopefully honing your interview skills and resume skills as well. Very important, which I'm sure NOVA is teaching you also. Also, the flexibility to think creatively. One of the things I talk about when I'm on stage, when I'm comparing actual IT work, meaning the maintenance and development of the network infrastructure and all of that versus cybersecurity, is simply this. If you have never sat down with your team and discussed calling in a bomb threat to a building to clear it out of your clients so that you can break into them, you're probably not doing cybersecurity. We think out of the box. We think creatively. We did not call in a bomb threat, by the way, but that was floated in one of my meetings. That was actually floated. And my default response was, yeah, but the cops don't know we're not terrorists. I don't think we should do that. But that's the kind of creativity I'm looking for in my staff. If you can think out of the box, if you can come up with a solution that is essentially something that is rarely tried or never tried, or maybe it's a whole new approach or aspect or thinking, I love that. We love that, because I love to say that I can't see what I can't fix. I don't know what I don't know. And if you know something I don't care if you're 20 years my junior, I'm all for it. That's great. And one of my favorite sayings in my business is, I love it when my employees come into my office or talk to me and say, Nick, you're an idiot, and here's why. I love that. The only caveat is you actually have to tell me why, and it has to be constructive. If you're just telling me I'm a jerk, that's not going to fly. Tell me why I'm a jerk. Tell me what I did wrong. I love to hear those conversations. So think creatively, think out of the box, think at how you can innovate in cybersecurity and develop that next cool product or that next approach to a solution. And that is awesome. Somebody created zero trust networking, zero trust architecture. You could be the next one. And I think that's really important to understand. Also, if you're on the software and dev side of things, advanced coding skills are rather important. You do not have to be a coder in order to work on things like network topology, but it definitely doesn't hurt. I've known multiple languages over the years, and I believe that has aided me in my career and developing specific tactics and approaches as we are looking at things like analyzing the code of ransomware, something we buy in the dark web rather regularly here. But having that also never hurts as well. To have that, especially if you're on the software and development side of things. So software composition analysis, penetration testing, those kinds of things really lend themselves to having good software and dev skills. So there you go. Also, a willingness to learn, and I'm not saying this as a cliche. One of the big problems that we have in a lot of technology is complacency, incremental growth, where I know that, let's say the iPhone 13 is going to be awesome compared to the 12 because it has a slightly better camera and a slightly better processor, and the 12 is better than the 11 because it has a slightly better processor and a slightly better camera. We never know when we have to slam on the brakes in cybersecurity because some 15-year-old kid out of Russia just hacked Google, and we're all trying to figure out what the heck just happened so we can turn around and properly defend our clients because Google just got hit. That actually happened in the mid-2000s. Feel free to Google Cosmo the God. Total jerk, brilliant hacker. So we want people that are willing to learn, that want this passion, that have this drive to learn the next level. Because as you increase on that pyramid that I showed you or hone these skills, the complexity of certifications also increase. And so by virtue of that, you can't sit for top level certifications with zero experience. You have to build up to that. And that's what we're talking about here. So having that drive, having that passion to learn, having that desire to want to help people and defend people, because at the end of the day, we are a service industry. I get to break into things and not get arrested, but at the end of the day, I'm helping people. People are more secure because of the work that I do, the work that my team does. And there's a lot of gratification in that. That is worth it to me. I'm making the world a little better place. And I think anybody that goes into cybersecurity is too, because we're the defenders essentially of the online realm. And that is a huge, huge thing. And outside of that basic is understanding of risk management. Now, the CISOs of the world, the chief information security officers of the world, are mired in compliance standards. They're mired in risk management, understanding at a very basic level how many computers can be off for how long before torches and pitchforks at the CEO's door or we're all out of business. And that is something that I think is rather important to understand. If you understand that at the end of the day, all we are doing in cybersecurity is mitigating risk by implementing various controls and snapping it into a framework, that is essentially what we are doing. That is a very high level, but I deal with risk all the time. And when a lot of organizations say, oh, we want you to do a penetration test on us, or we want a full-blown network assessment, I always start with risk. Do you understand the risk to your organization? Have you quantified that for me in hard and soft dollars? And so thinking in that mindset, getting in that mindset, I think is incredibly important to understand at the end of the day, whatever certifications and degrees you have, you are mitigating risk. So how does risk inform you, your job, your career development, all of these kinds of things? How are you mitigating it by strengthening security? And also ethics. This is beyond important. I helped Roosevelt University spin up an NSA certified cybersecurity program. And one of my main contributions is ethics. I like to say, if we're graduating another generation of black belt hackers, the last thing we want them to do is go and work for the bad guys. We want to make sure that we have good and ethical people. We want to help people. We don't want to rob the corporations and grandma in Idaho. That is a huge thing. So make sure that you are learning ethics. Make sure, ideally, that the people around you have good ethics as well. And I'm the first one to basically say when I screwed up. I'm the first one to admit mistakes. I am not perfect by any stretch. I've had a long career of making mistakes, and by virtue of that, I hopefully make less now. And so please understand that employers respect and they appreciate it when you own mistakes. If you're always passing the buck, it does not look good. And those are people that I personally don't want to work with. Own it. It's so important, and be ethical in your career and ideally in your life. And with that, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Thanks again to NOVA for having me here. I'm assuming Brittany will be back on screen very shortly. And I do daily videos and podcasts and all that kind of stuff on top of my nationally syndicated radio show, which you can find former episodes of on SoundCloud. My last interviewee was actually Neil deGrasse Tyson, which is will be live next week on SoundCloud. Or if you're near an NPR affiliate, you can hear it hopefully sooner than later. So with that, thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'm all yours.
All right. Thank you, Nick. That was great. That was a great talk. I learned a lot because my background is not cyber. So it was really helpful to me as well. So
Great.
I'm gonna jump in the chat, and students, feel free to continue to drop questions in the chat as we go throughout this Q&A portion, but I will scroll back to see if I missed any. So I see one that says, how important is having certifications for trying to find a job? I've heard that a lot of employers are having an issue with people having many certs, but don't have any actual hands-on knowledge working in cybersecurity.
Right. So it's a balance. As I mentioned before, if you're coming out of college with certifications and degrees, you will find a job in cybersecurity. I'm not kidding. It may be for a larger company that is willing to spend money to train you. The smaller ones typically don't have the budgets for training. Experience is important, right? Which is why I mentioned having like an internship as well. The more experience you have, the better. I know that's a difficult lift for college students because most of you are full-time college students. So having those degrees and those certifications, and as I mentioned, really honing your interview skills and resume skills is important. But I will tell you right now, I have plenty of colleagues that are looking at hiring college students right out of the gate, knowing that you have no experience, but you've had practical knowledge, practical application in the classroom, because the expectation is you are going to be trained on their methodology. You just have those foundational levels. So for example, I have somebody on my staff that is 22 years old. He is learning how to do auditing for compliance standards for Microsoft Azure, AWS, all of those kinds of things. He does not have that experience beyond classroom experience, and now he's getting it. So those jobs are out there. They absolutely are. But to your point, if you can get experience while you're getting this, like if you're going to school part-time and you've got a job, try to make that job for a tech company. Even if it's not cybersecurity, even if it's IT, it's still going to go a long way to really showing that you're dedicated to this and honing those skills. But if you have to do one or the other, especially if you're, let's say in your early 20s in college, graduating, having that degree, having that certification, I think will go a long way, to recruiters as well. Just don't expect to be a chief information security officer, at 22. Temper that expectation, but you can get on that path. So many organizations will train you, and that is the experience you need.
All right.
Good question.
Next question says, how did you start out? Like, what degree did you get? What's your highest degree level, or what degree did you start with?
So interestingly enough, I went to school where there were no degrees for cybersecurity. There were basically like one certification, for cybersecurity. My life story, long story short, I've been in this pretty much my whole life, self-taught, started getting certifications in my early 20s. I founded my first company in technology and cybersecurity at age 19. But prior to that, I had gained my first certification in infrastructure, network infrastructure, from Novell, Microsoft, and Cisco around the age of 12 or 13. And I broke into my first major government system at age 14. And I will not go into that one beyond saying simply that. So I like to say it's not in my blood, it's in my DNA. But the advantage that you have now starting out in this field is that you do have qualified paths for degrees in cybersecurity, for certifications, in a way that we simply didn't have that, when I was coming up. And so it's always why I love speaking to colleges and any educational institution, because I want to further that learning. I want all of you to get these degrees and enter the workforce. We need all of you, and you will all be hired. I maybe not by the first firm, but there's a hiring spree going on. We're throwing money at the problem, and that benefits you. So by virtue of that, I now have multiple certifications, probably 7 or 8 current ones, and that's outside of specific certifications for specific product lines that we use, like infrastructure, firewalls, those kinds of things. So I've probably had about 30 or so certifications over the years. And when I started getting active on social media and LinkedIn in like 2015 or 16, I went back trying to find the actual pieces of paper so I could put them in my work history. I could not find any of them. They're probably in my mother's basement somewhere. I hope she kept them, but yeah. But no, I've probably gotten about like 20 or 30, I would say, over the years. But again, it gets easier as you get more experience. But starting out, you've got a much better advantage than I did by virtue of having these pipelines and funnels to jobs as well as certifications. It's a great start.
And as a follow-up to that, Jake says, I'm sure I could search it up, but what's the name of your company?
So my company is Security Fanatics. New and better website coming soon, by the way, out there. We do all things cybersecurity, cyber warfare, cyber terrorism, infrastructure, and government compliance as well. So we work all the way from small business up to Fortune 100 that I consult with on network infrastructure design, security, all those kinds of things. And we've also worked in the defense industry and governments and all that kind of stuff. So it makes for an interesting time. But you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn /Nick Espinosa. You can't miss me. You'll see my mugshot. It's right there. So feel free to connect.
Absolutely. We have another question that says, what recommendations do you have for a 14-year-old who is interested in this field? What can I do to prepare myself now?
Well, like I said, I had certifications in networking and infrastructure because we really didn't have cybersecurity certifications like we do now back in the day when I was younger than 14. And so I would really, really recommend looking at taking some auxiliary courses. There are some high schools out there. I've been a huge advocate for this through Bits and Bytes Cybersecurity Education. I sit on their board where high school students are now starting to get classes in infrastructure, in networking, and in cybersecurity as well. You can also develop coding skills and then apply that into cybersecurity as well. There's also a lot of auxiliary courses in college. If you've got the aptitude for computers and networking, that would probably take you as well at that age. But there are a lot of resources out there for students. And so I would check your local high school district, or if you go to a private school, check with them, to see if they have any courses or options for you out there. For me, I was fortunate in the sense that my dad was a nerd. And so, he basically was able to get me a computer at a very young age. And when I started getting interested in these kinds of things, I started getting at a very young age certifications because he was able to introduce me into that. And so your school may have similar resources if your parents aren't as nerdy as mine were, and hopefully help you with that. But that's a great question. And hopefully we'll see you in the fight soon for cybersecurity. So I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from the audience members? And if you would like to unmute yourself, if that is easier for you to ask your question, you should be able to unmute yourself. But if you can't, let me know. Someone says, does cybersecurity deal with coding?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, having coding or development skills oftentimes is a good thing to have, depending on the aspect of cybersecurity. So one of the things that we do when we are analyzing and assessing an organization that pays us to do this, is looking at, especially if they're developing their own products or their own code, is we will do things like software composition analysis, software lifecycle development, and all these kinds of things. Not to mention the fact on the penetration testing side, when you are using, let's say, automated tools to find open vulnerabilities, then oftentimes we go to manual exploit framework, where coding skills really comes into key, as we are looking at exploiting the vulnerabilities in the software that are unpatched. So if you've got that, firewall out there that you haven't patched in 2 years, we can look up to see where the vulnerabilities are in the CVE database, and then apply those coding instructions and the skills in coding to essentially breaking into that firewall to show the client where they're vulnerable. So coding absolutely does help. And if you're very heavily in coding and you don't want to build the next $1 million app, you can definitely apply that to cybersecurity, no doubt.
A follow-up to that question, to build off of that, is there a specific language or package that is used in cybersecurity, or does that depend on the company and the problem to be solved?
So, I mean, it really depends on how they're coding. I mean, we see everything still from C++ to Python, Swift. Some organizations, if they're doing it quick and cheap, are using block coding. And so by virtue of that, it really depends. And it's been my experience that a lot of people that are very heavily into coding don't just stop with one language. They learn a multitude of languages and they apply that practically. So like one person that I work with here probably knows just off the top of his head, probably 15 different coding languages over the years, and I've known quite a few myself since then, but I wouldn't say there's any one specific thing. We still see a lot of Python in the cybersecurity world, for coding. Most people stay away from Java like the plague, but Swift is another one because it's become such a hot tool for development and therefore vulnerability management. So yeah, I don't have a straight answer for you, only in the sense that what we see is what we see. And we've walked into organizations that are like, oh yeah, here's our 20-year-old Unix server running Fortran, that we've had since the 70s, make it work, or like secure it, and it's, so I, there's no easy answer to that, but some of the big ones, like I mentioned, are the ones that we see a lot of.
All right, back to certifications. It says, will
Okay.
having a basic certification like Security Plus help me start a job and get paid more than if I didn't have any cert?
So having something like a Security Plus certification, which is a basic security certification for cybersecurity. I've actually done some work with CompTIA before, and the short answer is yes, because what it signifies, yes, to meaning I think it's a good thing to have. I think you will get slightly more money having that as opposed to not, because what it shows is that you've been through practical training. You've been through the basic foundational things for cybersecurity and approaching cybersecurity in a way that, let's say, a standard IT person doesn't. Or, hey, I've been working with computers my whole life. I want a job. I know how to build them. I know how to program Windows, et cetera, et cetera. So having that shows that you are on the path to a specific field, a specific understanding, and also a desire to have a deeper knowledge into cybersecurity. So I always smile when I see a Security Plus resume on there, because it shows me that the person is actually really interested in this. They've taken the time, energy, and effort to actually learn about cybersecurity at a pretty overview level. And I think that's a great thing. And then from there, that also helps inform, where their passions are. And then we can put them down a certification path, that will help make them successful in life. That's one of the things that we always do. We stress training, whether it's specific product certifications or holistic security certifications or anything else. Everybody on my staff, myself included, is always going through training to achieve some kind of certifications or maintain the certifications through continuing education. And so that's a very important thing.
Great question and great answer. You guys are asking some really good questions.
Yeah, I'm loving these. These are great.
Yeah. Someone asked, what general projects or tasks would someone who's working in the cybersecurity field be doing? Which I imagine it depends.
Yeah, so I mean, I can pull back the old slide I've got. Depending on the domain that you're going into, really depends on essentially where you're going. So I spend, for example, a good chunk of my time consulting with basically chief information security officers, chief information officers, CEOs, all of that, because that's where my practice is. That's where I'm at in my career. Some of my entry-level people have a passion or a drive or a deep understanding due to certifications and training on various aspects. So I mentioned that I've got a 22-year-old on staff that loves Microsoft Azure and AWS and cloud infrastructure. And so we've been basically putting together a process for him to get more advanced certifications from Microsoft and AWS on their specific products, and then obviously approaching that from a security engineer standpoint. So he's looking at essentially how these are secured. He's learning on that, and then he's looking at an actual security audit of this to train. And so that's essentially what we try to do with his day. Some stuff in compliance might be reviewing policies and procedures. If you're on the training side, you might spend all day phishing people, using anti-phishing platforms or educating people. It really depends on what you want to go into. If you're looking at, let's say, an overall consultancy, it depends on what the consultancy is looking for, in their people. So for me, deep infrastructure, understanding protocol theory, as I mentioned before, which is good for almost any cybersecurity position, is something that I really look for as well, because we are looking at basically walking into larger corporations and helping them redesign or strengthen their network configurations and topologies to make sure that their architecture is hardened and secure with the latest advances in cybersecurity, as well as looking at risk, whether it's supply chain risk, identity management, all of those things. So it really depends on what you're going to do and the need of the organization, but it also as well as your desire. So if you have a real desire to go into backups, for example, and they say, you will never do backups, but we'll hire you and you'll do this, you're either going to find a passion for that, or you're going to shoot yourself in 6 months and then go find a job that will give you the experience that you want. So that's the balance too that we try to have. So unfortunately, I cannot give you an exact on that because it really depends on all of those factors.
All right, it says, the next question says, would it make sense to learn the basics of older, more obscure languages like COBOL and Fortran, for example?
I don't think so at this point, only because those languages are very basic. The only reason why I think you would look at a COBOL or a Fortran, both of those languages I knew, by the way, I actually learned those at a very young age, just because those were still being used very heavily by a lot of companies. I was curious. The nice part about those, I mean, even basic, just shows you structurally how coding works. But for you to go and learn and eat and breathe COBOL and Fortran, that would be a very difficult lift. And the reason why I say that is there would be very few corporations out there, outside of the massive ones that have a lot of legacy systems, that would actually need that help from you. And so learning more modern coding languages at whatever level, I think is going to be more advantageous to your business. I will give you this example as well. So Motorola, we all know who Motorola is. Outside of making cell phones, they have an entire mobility side that uses digital and analog radios. They sell them to police, they sell them to military, and all of this. And as they were transitioning from analog to digital, and the military and law enforcement were basically taking the digital version, a lot of the military especially realized we still need the analog ones because the digital radios really stink in mountainous regions. They just can't penetrate signal-wise like an old analog radio can. And so Motorola was in a bind. They were no longer training their engineers on analog. And so they had to rehire a whole bunch of retired people to start training specifically for that. But that's a niche case. So as we progress, as we learn these new coding languages, as we learn digital as opposed to analog, I think it makes more sense to keep up with the current stuff, understanding that the old stuff is still there. It's still used for reference. The amount of times I've walked into a 20-year-old Unix server with Fortran, I could probably count on one hand in the last decade. 2 hands in the last 2 decades, probably. So no, I wouldn't go there unless you want it as good reference material to understand coding structure, which I think both of those languages would be good at. Other than that, no, I would continue to learn whatever modern language that you're learning. Good question, though. And thank you.
All right, we'll take another minute for any final thoughts, questions, comments in the chat?
Stop my share here as well. There we go.
While we are waiting on the final questions to roll in, I just want to say thank you to Nick again for being here with us tonight. And we appreciate you sharing all of this information with our students. It has been so super helpful. Thank you to all of you students for also being with us all week long. I'm really, really proud of you all for sticking it out and showing up every day. And so we hope to see you tomorrow as well. 1 second. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, I know that game. So all good. All good. And thank you for the record for having me as well. I really appreciate it while Brittany is doing her thing. Yeah, I always, like I said, I always love talking to students. Thank you so very much, for having me. It's always appreciated. And always feel free to find me on LinkedIn or drop me a line and stuff like that. I love hearing from students. I'm not always the fastest turnaround when it comes to responding to messages because I get about 200 to 400 messages a day on LinkedIn alone, but I will eventually get to you. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I filled in.
Thank you.
Right.
Again, thank you to the students and thank you to our captioner for providing the captioning services for tonight. And with that, we will see you all tomorrow at 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock tomorrow for the CompTIA Security Plus exam prep. Again, thank you all. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Carol, thank you.